Thomas Mason never expected to find 3 children on his struggling farm that morning. The identical triplets sat huddled by his fence, their small backpacks and tear-stained faces telling a story of desperation. Without thinking twice, he brought them into his modest home, sharing what little he had. He didn't know their names or where they came from, but he knew they needed help. For 3 days, they became part of his simple life, helping with chores, sharing meals at his old wooden table, finding moments of laughter despite their circumstances. Then came the sound that would change everything, the whirring of helicopter blades above his cornfield. A sleek black helicopter landed, bringing with it a truth that would shake Thomas's world to its core. What secret were these children carrying? That was worth sending a private helicopter to a poor farmer's doorstep. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning had started like any other on Mason's farm. Thomas rose before dawn, his weathered hands automatically reaching for the coffee pot as roosters announced the day. 20 years of working this land had etched deep lines around his eyes, and silver through his hair, but never dimmed the quiet determination in his gaze. He was halfway through his morning inspection of the struggling cornfield when he first saw them. 3 small figures huddled against his eastern fence line, their matching blue backpacks dusty from travel. Thomas stopped, squinting against the rising sun. In 2 decades of farming, he'd seen plenty of strange sights, but nothing like this. "Hello there," he called softly, approaching with the same careful steps he used with spooked cattle. Here, children, identical triplets, he realized with astonishment, pressed closer together. Their faces were mirrors of each other. Same deep brown eyes, same tousled dark hair, same fear-tinged exhaustion. "We're sorry," the middle one spoke, voice barely above a whisper. "We didn't mean to trespass." Thomas knelt in the dirt, keeping his distance. "No harm done. You 3 look like you could use some breakfast." The children exchanged glances, a silent conversation passing between them. The one on the left, clutching a worn teddy bear missing an eye, nodded almost imperceptibly. "I'm Thomas," he said, gesturing toward his modest farmhouse. "I make pretty good pancakes if you're interested." It was the smallest gesture, but sometimes the smallest gestures change everything. The triplet on the right, gripping his sibling's hands tightly, took a tentative step forward. In his kitchen, Thomas worked quietly, letting the familiar routine of measuring flour and heating the griddle fill the awkward silence. The children sat at his old oak table, their eyes following his every move. He noticed how they flinched at sudden sounds, how they kept glancing toward the door. "My wife Sarah used to add vanilla to the batter," Thomas said conversationally, reaching for the extract she'd left behind. "Makes them special." "Is she here?" the one with the teddy bear asked. Thomas shook his head, the familiar ache in his chest softening with time. "No, she passed 5 years ago. Cancer." "We're sorry," they said in unison, and something in their sincere sympathy made Thomas's throat tight. As he set plates before them, watching their eyes widen at the stack of golden pancakes, he finally asked, "Do you have names?" Another silent exchange passed between them before the middle one spoke again. "I'm Michael, this is Marcus," he pointed to teddy bear holder, "and Matthew." Thomas nodded, noting how they ate carefully, taking small bites despite their obvious hunger. "Well, Michael, Marcus, and Matthew, you're welcome to rest here a while." The relief that flooded their identical faces told him everything he needed to know about what they were running from. As they ate, Thomas noticed crayon marks on Marcus's fingers, and without a word, he retrieved Sarah's old notepad and a box of crayons from the junk drawer. While he cleaned up, the triplets huddled over their drawing, when Marcus shyly presented it to him. 3 stick figures holding hands with the taller one in overalls. Thomas felt something shift in his heart, like a rusty gate creaking open. "That's real nice," he said, carefully pinning it to his refrigerator. "Real nice indeed." By midday, the triplets had fallen asleep on his old couch, their small bodies curled together like puppies. Thomas stood in the doorway, watching them breathe, 1,000 questions spinning in his mind. He should call the authorities, he knew that. But something, call it instinct, call it fate, made him hesitate. Instead, he picked up his phone and called the only person he could trust. "Betty, it's Thomas. I could use some children's clothes, size 8, I reckon, and maybe some advice." As he spoke quietly into the phone, watching the sleeping children, Thomas couldn't shake the feeling that his life had just changed irrevocably. He didn't know their story yet, didn't know what forces had driven 3 8-year-old boys to seek refuge on his failing farm. But he knew, with the same certainty that told him when rain was coming, or when the soil was ready for planting, that he would protect them with everything he had. Betty arrived just before sunset, her ancient pickup truck rattling up the gravel driveway, with 3 bags of children's clothes and a look of determined curiosity on her weathered face. She'd been the closest thing to family Thomas had since Zara passed, running the general store in town with the same no-nonsense attitude she applied to everything else in life. "Lord have mercy," she whispered, peering through the screen door at the triplets now helping Thomas set the table for dinner. "When you said 3, I thought you were pulling my leg." Thomas wiped his hands on a dish towel, stepping onto the porch. "Found them by the east fence this morning. They were scared half to death, Betty." She studied his face, reading the worry lines she'd known for 20 years. "You called the police yet?" "No." The word hung between them like morning. "Missed? Something ain't right about this situation. They're too scared, too careful." Betty sighed, reaching into her truck for the bags. "Well, they can't wear those dirty clothes forever. Sarah's recipe book's still in that top drawer." Thomas nodded, grateful for her unspoken support. Betty had known Sarah since high school, had been there through the worst of the cancer. She knew what the empty house had done to him. Inside, Betty took charge with quiet efficiency. She showed the boys where to wash up, helped them change into clean clothes, and pulled Sarah's old recipe book from its drawer. The leather-bound volume had been a wedding gift, its pages stained with 20 years of love and flour. "Your mama was the best cook in 3 counties, Betty told the triplets as she showed them how to measure ingredients for Sarah's famous meatloaf. "Used to win the county fair cooking contest every year." Michael, the natural leader of the 3, carefully stirred the breadcrumbs into the meat. "Did you win too, Mr. Thomas?" Thomas chuckled, pulling out Sarah's favorite mixing bowl. "Lord. No, I burned water till Sarah taught me, but she made sure I could handle the basics before she left." As they cooked together, the boys began to relax. Marcus still clutched his teddy bear, but Matthew ventured a small smile when Thomas showed him how to shape the loaf. The kitchen filled with the familiar sense of Sarah's recipe, and for a moment the house felt like a home again. After dinner, Betty pulled Thomas aside while the boys cleaned up. "They need school, Thomas, need proper documentation, need—" "I know," he interrupted gently. "Just give me a little time. Something brought them here, Betty. Something bad enough to make 3 little boys run away together." She studied him for a long moment, then nodded. 3 days. That's all I can give you before people start asking questions." That night, after Betty left and the boys were tucked into Sarah's old quilts in the spare room, Thomas sat at his kitchen table with a cup of cooling coffee. The children's drawing hung on his refrigerator, a crayon testament to trust freely given. The next morning established a routine that would carry them through the next 3 days. The boys woke early, eager to help with chores. Thomas showed them how to feed the chickens, taught them the names of his 2 old dairy cows, let them help water the struggling corn. They worked together in comfortable silence, broken occasionally by quiet questions. Thomas learned they loved chocolate but hated peas, that Marcus was 10 minutes older than Michael, who was 5 minutes older than Matthew, that they could read chapter books but preferred stories about animals. What they didn't tell him was more revealing. No mention of parents, no talk of home, no hint of their life before the fence line. But he saw how they watched the road, how they froze at the sound of passing cars, how they huddled together at unexpected noises, Each night, Thomas added another recipe from Sarah's book to their repertoire. The boys took to cooking like ducklings to water, especially Michael, who had his mother's instinct for knowing when something needed just a pinch. More. By the third day, watching them chase fireflies in the twilight, Thomas knew he couldn't let them go. Whatever storm was coming, whatever secrets those identical faces held, he would weather it. Sometimes family wasn't about blood or birth. Sometimes it was about three scared boys and a lonely farmer finding each other when they needed it most. The first signs of trouble arrived with the morning paper. Thomas nearly missed it, buried on page 3 of the local Gazette. Search continues for missing Hamilton heirs. The grainy photo stopped his heart. 3 identical boys in pressed suits, their faces solemn beneath a headline about one of the country's wealthiest families. He stood in his kitchen, coffee forgotten, staring at the familiar faces rendered strange in their expensive clothes. Behind him, he could hear the triplets feeding the chickens, their laughter drifting through the open window. Betty called before he could fully process what he was reading. "Turn on your TV, Thomas. Channel 7. The national news was running the story on repeat. A reporter stood outside an imposing estate, talking about the mysterious disappearance of the Hamilton triplets, heirs to one of America's largest private fortunes. Behind her, security guards patrolled manicured lawns, while a silver-haired man in an expensive suit pleaded for his grandchildren's safe return. A reward of $5 million is being offered for information leading to their recovery," the reporter announced. "Alexander Hamilton III emphasizes that no questions will be asked and full immunity will be granted to anyone who may have unknowingly assisted in their disappearance." Thomas muted the TV as the boys came in for breakfast. They froze in the doorway, their eyes fixed on the screen where their grandfather's face still dominated the frame. Marcus's teddy bear dropped to the floor. "He found us," Matthew whispered, terror threading through his voice. Thomas moved quickly, turning off the TV and kneeling before them. "Nobody's found you. You're safe here." But the damage was done. The easy comfort of the past 3 days shattered like spring ice. Michael, always the spokesman, stepped forward. "We have to leave. We can't let him hurt you too." "Hold on now," Thomas said, guiding them to the kitchen table. "Let's talk about this. Who's trying to hurt who?" Before they could answer, a police cruiser pulled into the driveway. Sheriff Dan Walker, who'd gone to high school with Thomas, stepped out adjusting his hat against the morning sun. "Stay here," Thomas told the boys, seeing the panic in their eyes. "Nobody's taking you anywhere, I promise." The screen door creaked as Thomas stepped onto the porch. Dan's face was grave beneath his department-issue sunglasses. "Morning, Thomas. Been hearing some interesting stories about your farm lately." "Just helping some kids in need, Dan." The sheriff nodded slowly. "Those kids wouldn't happen to match the description of 3 missing boys from up north, would they?" Thomas met his old friend's gaze steadily. "You here officially, Dan?" "Not yet." Dan glanced at the kitchen window, where 3 identical faces quickly ducked out of sight. "But I will be soon. Whole town's talking, Thomas. Reward money's got people thinking hard about what they've seen." "They're scared of something, Dan. You can see it in their eyes." "Maybe so." The sheriff shifted his weight. "Decades of friendship warring with duty. But they're minors, Thomas. There's procedures, and that reward money's attracted some unsavory types. Had 2 bounty hunters check in at the motel this morning." Thomas felt a chill despite the warm morning. "Give me time, Dan. Let me figure out what's really going on here." "You got 24 hours, Dan said after a long moment. "Then I got to do my job, friend or not." As the cruiser pulled away, Thomas turned to find the triplets huddled in the doorway. Their faces were pale, but there was a determination there that broke his heart. "We'll go," Michael said quietly. "We don't want to cause trouble." Thomas knelt again, looking into 3 pairs of identical eyes. "You're not going anywhere until you tell me what you're running from. Why are you so scared of your grandfather?" The boys exchanged their silent, synchronized glances. Finally, Marcus spoke, his voice barely a whisper. "He's not our grandfather. Not really, and if he finds us, He trailed off, clutching his teddy bear tighter. "The lawyers said we had to call him that," Matthew added. "After the accident." "What accident?" Thomas asked gently. But they clammed up again, years of trained silence settling over them like a heavy blanket. Thomas stood, making a decision that would change all their lives forever. "All right then. We've got 24 hours to figure this out. First things first, we need to talk to Betty. She's got friends at the county records office who might help us understand what we're dealing with." Betty's research would have to wait. The helicopter's thunder reached them before they could leave the farm, its rotors beating the morning air into submission. Thomas watched it approach through his kitchen window, sleek, black, and more expensive than his entire farm. The boys pressed against him, 3 racing hearts he could feel through his worn shirt. "It's him," Michael whispered, his voice nearly lost in the growing roar. The helicopter circled once, rotors whipping the struggling corn into submission before settling onto Thomas's south field. The skid marks it left would become a scar in his land, a reminder of the moment everything changed. 2 men in dark suits emerged first, their ties whipping in the artificial wind. Behind them came Alexander Hamilton III himself, exactly as he'd appeared on the morning news, but somehow more imposing in person. His silver hair remained perfectly styled despite the rotor wash. His suit probably cost more than Thomas's annual harvest. "Stay inside," Thomas told the boys, but they gripped his shirt tighter. "Don't go out there," Marcus pleaded. "Please." Thomas gently disentangled himself. "Sometimes a man has to stand his ground. Lock the door behind me." He stepped onto his porch just as the visitors reached it. Up close, Hamilton's face was a map of hard lines and cold authority. The kind of face that wasn't used to hearing no. "Mr. Mason," Hamilton's voice carried the polish of expensive education. "I believe you have something that belongs to me." Thomas planted his feet, feeling the solid wood of his porch beneath him. "Don't recall anything here belonging to you, Mr. Hamilton." "My grandchildren." Hamilton's smile didn't reach his eyes. "We've been searching for them quite frantically. Surely you've seen the news." "Seen it?" Thomas nodded. "Saw 3. Scared boys, too. Kind that don't run away from a loving home." The suited men shifted, hands moving subtly toward their jackets. Hamilton waved them still. "I understand your concern, Mr. Mason. It's admirable. But you're involved in something far beyond your comprehension. Those boys are heirs to a multi-billion dollar corporation. Their place is with their family." "Funny thing about family," Thomas said quietly. "Blood ain't always the strongest tie." Hamilton's facade cracked slightly. "I'm prepared to be generous, Mr. Mason. $2 million cash. More than fair for 3 days of babysitting." Inside the house, Thomas heard a small gasp. He kept his eyes on Hamilton. "Boys ain't for sale." "Don't be a fool." Hamilton stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You're a failing farmer with a mortgaged farm. I can make your life very comfortable or very difficult. Your choice." Before Thomas could respond, the screen door creaked. Michael stood there, flanked by his brothers, their faces set with a courage that belied their years. "We won't go with you," Michael announced, his voice carrying across the porch. "You can't make us." Hamilton's smile turned predatory. "Children, you're confused. Remember what Dr. Werner said about these episodes?" "We're not confused." Marcus stepped forward, still clutching his teddy bear. "We remember everything about Mom and Dad, about the accident." "The accident that wasn't an accident," Matthew added quietly. Hamilton's face hardened. "Clearly these past few days have aggravated your delusions. Dr. Werner will need to adjust your medication." Thomas felt something cold settle in his stomach. "Medication?" "The boys have had emotional difficulties since their parents' tragic accident," Hamilton explained smoothly. "They require special care, professional care." "We're not crazy," Michael's voice cracked. "We saw the papers in your office. You made it happen. The breaks—" "Enough!" Hamilton's shout made the boys flinch. "Mr. Mason, you're harboring minors illegally. My lawyers will have custody papers within the hour. Remove yourself from this situation while you still can." Thomas looked at the three boys, their faces pale but determined, their hands clasped together, then at Hamilton with his power and wealth and cold, cold eyes. The choice was simple. "Get off my property." Hamilton's smile vanished entirely. "You're making a terrible mistake." "No, sir." Thomas straightened to his full height. "I reckon I'm finally doing something right. And if those custody papers come, they'll find 3 boys who chose to run. And for a reason. Might make folks curious about what they were running from." The suited men moved forward, but Hamilton held up his hand. "This isn't over, Mr. Mason. Not by a long shot." He turned, gesturing to his men. "Call Werner. Tell him to prepare the facility." They retreated to the helicopter, its rotors spinning up to a scream. Thomas watched it lift off, taking Hamilton's threats with it, but leaving behind the certainty of a war to come. When the sound faded, Thomas turned to find the boys still on his porch, their faces a mixture of terror and hope. "Did you mean it?" Michael asked. "About letting us stay?" Thomas nodded. "Meant every word. Now, let's go see. Betty, reckon we got some papers of our own to find." Betty's fingers flew across her computer keyboard, her reading glasses perched on the end of her nose. The boys sat huddled on her worn office couch, while Thomas paced the small space behind her general store. "Hamilton Industries," Betty read. "Aloud, one of the largest private energy companies in North America. CEO Alexander Hamilton III took control after his son and daughter-in-law's tragic accident last year." She paused, clicking through more pages. "Here's something. A family photo album was released to the press after the accident, the screen filled with images of a younger, smiling family. A handsome man with the boy's dark hair stood beside a beautiful woman, 3 identical toddlers balanced between them." The boys drew closer to the screen. "That's Mom and Dad," Marcus whispered, his teddy bear dropping forgotten to his lap. "Before everything changed." Michael touched the screen gently. "Dad always called Mom his sunshine girl," she laughed. "All the time. Until Grandfather moved in," Matthew added quietly. "After the company started having problems." Betty and Thomas exchanged glances. "What kind of problems?" Betty asked carefully. The boys shared one of their silent conversations before Michael spoke. Dad was changing things. He said the company needed to be cleaner, better for the planet. "Green energy initiatives," Betty murmured, typing again. "Here it is. James Hamilton announced a major company restructuring last year, planning to shift billions in assets toward renewable energy projects." "Grandfather was furious," Marcus hugged his bear again. "We heard them fighting. Dad said he didn't care about the money, that some things were more important. Then came the accident." Matthew's voice trembled. "But it wasn't—" "Now! Now!" A new voice interrupted from the doorway. Dr. Werner stood there, his thin frame silhouetted against the afternoon light. 2 large men flanked him. "We don't want to excite ourselves with these fantasies again, do we?" The boys froze. Thomas moved instinctively between them and the door, but Dr. Werner's smile never wavered. "Mr. Mason, I'm the boys' psychiatrist. They have a complicated relationship with reality since their parents' death. Survivors' guilt manifesting as conspiracy theories, quite common in trauma cases. They were murdered." Michael stood suddenly, his small voice fierce. "We saw the papers, the brake lines were cut. And now Grandfather's doing the same thing to the planet that he did to Mom and Dad." Dr. Werner sighed, reaching into his jacket. "Nurse, the sedatives, please." "You ain't touching these boys." Thomas's voice carried the weight of his years. "Working the land." Betty was already on the phone. "Dan, we need you at the store, now." "This is a medical situation." Dr. Werner's smile thinned. "These children are disturbed. They require treatment." "Only thing disturbed here is how fast you showed up," Thomas countered. "Almost like you were waiting nearby." "Mr. Hamilton anticipated resistance," Werner admitted. The facility is prepared for an extended treatment period. The boys will be quite comfortable. A facility? Betty's voice dripped with disgust. You mean somewhere to hide them until they're too drugged to remember? What they saw? Werner's pleasant mask cracked slightly. These accusations are dangerous, Mrs. Parker. Hamilton Industries has extensive legal resources. So do we. Betty turned her computer screen around. Amazing what you can find in public records, like permits for private wellness centers owned by shell companies, or autopsy reports that somehow went missing after James and Laura Hamilton's deaths. The sound of police sirens grew in the distance. Dr. Werner's face hardened. This isn't over, he said, echoing his employer's words from that morning. Those boys are Hamilton property. They ain't property at all, Thomas said quietly. They're children, and they're staying right here. After Werner and his men retreated, Thomas turned to find all three boys crying silently, years of forced composure finally breaking. He gathered them close, feeling their small bodies shake with suppressed sobs. You believe us? Michael hiccuped, against his shirt. Every word, Thomas assured them, meeting Betty's determined gaze over their heads. And we're gonna prove it, all of it. Sheriff Dan Walker studied the farm's deed spread across Thomas's kitchen table, his coffee growing cold beside it. The triplets sat opposite him, their eyes never leaving the document that represented their newfound sanctuary. Legally, you're on solid ground, Dan said finally. Property's been in your family 3 generations, paid off. Hamilton can't touch it. He'll try, Betty warned from the stove, where she was stress-baking Sarah's recipe for apple pie. Men like that always do. As if summoned by her words, a black SUV pulled up the driveway. 2 lawyers emerged, their expensive suits gathering dust from the farm road. Here we go, Thomas muttered, standing. Boys, go help Betty with that pie. But Michael shook his head. We're tired of hiding, tired of being scared, Marcus added, his teddy bear sitting proudly on the table beside him. Tired of letting him win, Matthew finished. Thomas felt a surge of pride mixed with worry. These boys had faced more in their 8 years than most, faced in a lifetime. He nodded, letting them stay as the lawyers entered without knocking. Mr. Mason, the taller one began, we have a court order. Let me see it, Dan interrupted. Badge glinting. The lawyers exchanged glances before handing over a thick envelope. Dan read carefully, his expression unchanging. This isn't a court order, he said finally. It's a custody petition. Big difference. Mr. Hamilton has substantial evidence that these children require specialized care. You mean they need to be silenced, Betty interrupted, wielding her rolling pin like a weapon, before they can testify about what they saw. The shorter lawyer smiled thinly. Mrs. Parker, making unfounded accusations against Mr. Hamilton could result in significant legal consequences. Truth still truth, Thomas said quietly. Don't matter how much money tries to bury it. Mr. Mason, the taller lawyer tried again, be reasonable. Mr. Hamilton is prepared to be extremely generous. The deed to your farm, for instance, ain't for sale. Thomas cut him off. Neither are these boys. Then perhaps we should discuss your outstanding property taxes, or the environmental survey that's overdue, or the health inspection your farm hasn't passed since never, Dan interrupted, because farms this size don't require them. Want to try another threat? The lawyer's practiced composure cracked slightly. The shorter one pulled out a phone. Mr. Hamilton anticipated your reluctance. He's authorized me to double the offer. $4 million, Mr. Mason. Think what you could do with that money. Modernize your farm, secure your future. Thomas looked at the boys, saw the fear beneath their brave faces, then at Betty, her hands white-knuckled on the rolling pin. Finally at Dan, his old friend nodding slightly. My future's right here, Thomas said, and it ain't for sale at any price. Then you leave us no choice, the taller lawyer sighed. We'll see you in court, Mr. Mason. Every day of litigation will cost you more than you earn in a year. How long can a struggling farmer afford to fight a multi-billion-dollar corporation? He won't be fighting alone, Betty stepped forward. I've called every news outlet in 3 states. They're very interested in why Hamilton Industries is so desperate to silence 3 little boys. And I've got some questions about that accident. Investigation, Dan added. Seems a lot of evidence went missing from the police lockup. Anonymous tips say it might have ended up in a Hamilton Industries shredder. The lawyers retreated, but their threats lingered like storm clouds. After they left, Thomas sank into his chair, the weight of what they faced settling on his shoulders. They'll be back, he said quietly. Let them come, Betty said fiercely. Some fights need fighting, Thomas. The boys moved then, surrounding Thomas with their small arms. Their fear remained, but something else shone in their identical faces. Hope. We'll help, Michael promised. We remember everything about the company, about what Dad was trying to change, about what Grandfather's hiding, Marcus added, about why he's really scared of us. Matthew finished. Thomas hugged them close, feeling the truth of Betty's words. Some fights did need fighting. And looking at these brave, wounded boys who'd chosen him to protect them, he knew this was one battle he couldn't lose. The document lay innocently on Betty's desk, its corporate letterhead bearing the Hamilton Industries logo. She'd called Thomas the moment her contact at the county records office delivered it. It's a trust document, Betty explained, pointing to the legal jargon. Drawn up by James Hamilton before he died. Look at the conditions. Thomas leaned closer, the boys peering around him. The paper was dense with legal terms, but one section stood out, highlighted by Betty's careful hand. Upon reaching the age of majority 18, control of voting shares shall pass jointly to Michael, Marcus, and Matthew Hamilton, to be exercised only through unanimous consent. Dad made us the real owners, Michael whispered. Not Grandfather. That's why he's so desperate to control you. Betty nodded. Without all 3 of you agreeing, Hamilton Industries can't make any major changes, like dumping waste in the river? Matthew asked quietly. Thomas turned sharply. What waste? The boys exchanged glances before Marcus reached into his teddy bear, pulling out a folded paper. We took this from Grandfather's office the night before the accident. It was an internal memo, marked confidential. Betty read it aloud, her voice growing harder with each word. Cost analysis shows environmental compliance would reduce profits by 40%. Recommend continuing current disposal methods. Legal exposure minimal due to political connections. Your father saw this? Thomas asked. Michael nodded. He was so angry, said he was going to the governor. That's when the brakes failed, Matthew finished. A knock at the door made them all jump. Dan entered, his face grim. Got something you need to see. He laid out a series of photographs on Betty's desk. These were taken at Hamilton's Wellness Center last year. My contact in the state police just got them declassified. The images showed a clinical facility, white walls and locked doors. Children's artwork hung in sterile rooms, crayon drawings that showed too much sadness for young hands. He puts kids there? Betty's voice shook with rage. Troubled children from wealthy families, Dan confirmed. Place specializes in behavioral modification. But look at this. He pointed to a sign barely visible in one photo. Werner Psychiatric Solutions. The doctor who tried to take us. Marcus clutched his bear tighter. Gets worse, Dan continued. Every kid admitted there comes out made different, quiet, compliant, perfect little heirs who never question their parents' business practices. Thomas felt sick. He was going to send them there. His own grandchildren. We're not really his. Michael said suddenly, that's what Mom told us before. She said we were adopted. That's why the trust is so important. Dad made sure we had control, not blood relation. The revelation hung in the air. Betty was already typing furiously on her computer. Birth records, hospital files, everything sealed, but there might be a way. Her phone rang, making them all start again. She answered, listening intently before her face paled. When? Yes, he's here. We'll be ready. She hung up, turning to Thomas. Hamilton's called an emergency board meeting tomorrow morning. He's going to try to void the trust, claims the boys are mentally incompetent. Can he do that? Thomas demanded. With enough corrupt doctors and judges? Betty's voice was bitter. He might. Then we stop him, Dan said simply. Those photos aren't the only evidence my contact found. There's financial records, environmental reports. But will it be enough? Thomas looked at the boys, seeing the fear creeping back into their eyes. It has to be, Betty said firmly, because if Hamilton wins tomorrow, these boys disappear into that facility, and everything their parents died trying to expose dies. With them. Michael stood suddenly, his small face set with determination. Then we tell everyone, everything we know, about the company, about the accident, about what really happens in the facility, Marcus added, about who we really are. Matthew finished. Thomas knelt before them. You sure? Once this starts? We're sure, they said in unison. Betty was already reaching for her phone. I know a reporter. She's been investigating Hamilton Industries for months. With your testimony, he'll try to stop us, Dan warned. Thomas looked at the trust document, the facility photos, the environmental memo, at 3 brave boys who'd been running for so long. Let him try, he said quietly. Some things are worth fighting for. They worked through the night, piecing together the evidence, preparing for the battle ahead. And if Thomas saw the boys hiding their yawns, holding each other's hands for courage, he only felt his resolve strengthen. Tomorrow would change everything, one way or another. Dawn crept over the farm, painting the kitchen windows gold. No one had slept much. The boys' birth certificates lay on the table. Pristine new copies rushed from the county records office by Betty's contact. 3 identical documents with one glaring omission, no parents listed. Closed adoption, Betty explained, her voice rough from a night of phone calls. But look at the witness signatures. Thomas leaned closer, coffee forgotten in his hand. James Hamilton and Laura Chen Hamilton. Mom's maiden name was Chen. Michael said softly, like yours, Mr. Thomas. The coincidence wasn't lost on anyone. Betty had already traced Thomas's family tree, finding no direct connection. But still, the shared name felt like a sign. The board meeting's in 4 hours, Dan said, checking his watch. Hamilton's lawyers will have motions filed to block the boys' testimony. Let them try. Betty's smile was fierce. She pulled out another document, their secret weapon. Birth mother's consent form, signed by Sarah Chen. Thomas's coffee cup hit the floor. The boys jumped at the sound. Sarah! Thomas's voice cracked. My Sarah? Betty nodded, tears in her eyes. She never told you. The adoption was closed, sealed by court order. But she was their birth mother, Thomas. She gave them up because she was sick. The first round of cancer. Wanted them to have a better life than a struggling farm could provide. The boys stared at Thomas with new eyes. Michael stepped forward, touching the fallen cup. That's why it felt like home here. That's why we weren't scared, Marcus added, hugging his bear tighter. That's why we trusted you, Matthew finished. Thomas sat heavily, his world spinning. Sarah had known, all those years. Watching the news about the Hamilton family, she'd known these boys were hers, were his. She wanted to tell you, Betty said gently, but the adoption agreement, the boys needed protection. Thomas understood suddenly. Powerful family, sealed records. She was protecting them, protecting me. A car crunched up the gravel driveway. The reporter Betty had called. Thomas looked at the boys. His boys. He realized with a jolt. Sarah's boys. Choice is yours, he told them quietly. We can fight, tell everything, but it'll be hard. Dangerous, maybe. The triplets didn't even need their usual silent conference. Michael spoke for all of them. Mom and Dad, James and Laura, they died fighting him. We won't let him win. Betty was already spreading documents across the table. Hamilton's environmental violations, Werner's facility records, the trust document, birth certificates, everything. The reporter entered, looking sharp despite the early hour. Her eyes widened at the sight of the 3 identical boys. Sarah was my wife, Thomas said simply. These boys are her sons, and Hamilton Industries is trying to erase them. The reporters Recorder clicked on. Michael stepped forward, Marcus and Matthew flanking him. "Oh, we want to tell you about our parents," Michael began. "About what really happened to them. About what grandfather's been hiding," Marcus continued. "About what we saw that night," Matthew finished. As the boys spoke, Thomas watched their faces, Sarah's determination shining through in every word. The truth would come out today one way or another. The birth certificates lay between them on the table, a bridge between past and present, between what was lost and what was found. Outside, more cars were arriving. Betty's network of allies, environmental lawyers, state investigators, former Hamilton Industries employees ready to testify. The small farm was becoming command central for what would become the biggest corporate scandal in state history. Dan's radio crackled. Hamilton's motorcade had left the city. The board meeting loomed. Thomas looked at his newly discovered family, at the support gathering around them, at Sarah's recipe book still open on the counter where Betty had left it last night. Sometimes family found you when you weren't looking. Sometimes the greatest acts of love were the ones made in silence, like a mother giving up her sons to protect them, or three boys running toward a stranger who shared their mother's name. "Ready?" he asked them. Three identical nods, three sets of eyes shining with Sarah's courage. It was time to finish what James and Laura Hamilton had started. Time to make Hamilton Industries face its sins. Time to bring a family, all of it, into the light. The Hamilton Industries headquarters rose like a steel and glass mountain against the morning sky. Thomas's old truck looked out of place in the executive parking lot, flanked by Betty's station wagon and Dan's police cruiser. News vans were already gathering, drawn by anonymous tips about the emergency board meeting. A security guard approached, then backed away at the sight of Dan's badge. The boys stayed close to Thomas, their good clothes, borrowed from Betty's grandson, a stark contrast to the corporate suits streaming past them. The old scarecrow from Thomas's farm sat in the truck bed, a silent guardian. He'd almost left it behind, but Marcus insisted. "It protected the farm," he'd said. "Maybe it can protect us, too." The lobby fell silent as they entered. Alexander Hamilton III stood at the reception desk, his face darkening at the sight of them. "This is a private meeting," he began. "Not anymore." The reporter from that morning stepped forward, flanked by her camera crew. "Care to comment on your company's environmental violations, Mr. Hamilton? Or perhaps about Dr. Werner's special facility for inconvenient heirs?" Hamilton's mask slipped for just a moment. "Security! State police," Dan countered, showing his badge again. "Here to investigate multiple allegations of corporate fraud and criminal negligence." "Whatever these children have told you," Hamilton started. "They're not just any children," Betty interrupted. "They're Sarah Chen's children, and they're here to take back their company." The lobby erupted in whispers. Hamilton's face went from red to white. "Sarah Chen, the same Sarah Chen who worked here 20 years ago," Michael stepped forward, "in the Environmental Compliance Office." "Who found the first evidence of illegal dumping," Marcus added. "Who disappeared right after," Matthew finished, "but not before making sure we'd be safe." Thomas watched understanding dawn on Hamilton's face. "She knew," Thomas said quietly. "My wife knew what you were doing back then. That's why she gave them to James and Laura, to protect them from you." "Ridiculous," Hamilton sputtered. "These are corporate matters. Security, remove them." "Not without a warrant," Dan stepped forward. "And I've got one right here, along with some interesting documents from your company's archives." Betty pulled out her phone, showing emails she'd received overnight. "Former employees are already and talking, Mr. Hamilton, about the dumping, about the accidents, about Sarah." The elevator dinged and board members began emerging, drawn by the commotion. They stopped short at the scene before them. "Ladies and gentlemen," the reporter called out, "would you like to know what your CEO has been hiding?" "This is absurd," Hamilton's voice rose. "These boys are disturbed. They need treatment. Dr. Werner is already in custody," Dan cut in. singing like a bird about your special facility, about what really happens to heirs who ask too many questions. The boys moved then, pulling out the documents they'd gathered. Michael held up the trust papers. "We are the legal owners of Hamilton Industries." Marcus showed the environmental reports. "And we know what you've been doing to our rivers." Matthew raised the accident report, "And we can prove what you did to our parents." Thomas watched his boys, Sarah's boys, standing tall against the man who'd tried to erase them. The scarecrow might have been back in the truck, but its spirit of protection lived in every person who'd gathered to help these children reclaim their truth. Hamilton looked around the lobby, at the growing crowd of witnesses, at the cameras recording everything. His carefully constructed world was crumbling. "The board meeting will proceed as scheduled," he said stiffly. "But only authorized personnel." "We're authorized," Michael said firmly, "by the trust Dad created, by the truth Mom and Dad died protecting, and by the mother who gave us up to keep us safe." Thunder rumbled outside, a summer storm approaching. But in the Hamilton Industries lobby, an even bigger storm was breaking, one that had been building for 20 years, since a young environmental officer named Sarah Chen first discovered what Alexander Hamilton was willing to do for profit. The truth was finally coming to light, and not even the most powerful man in the state could stop it now. The boardroom doors swung open, revealing a long table of stern faces. But before Hamilton could speak, an elderly woman at the far end stood up, her hands trembling on her walker. "I remember Sarah Chen," she announced, her voice carrying surprising strength. "I was head of human resources when she worked here." She pulled out a yellowed legal brief from her bag. "I kept this all these years, hoping someone would finally ask the right questions." Hamilton's face tightened. "Margaret, you're retired. Emeritus board member," she corrected sharply, "and I've sat quiet too long." She gestured to the boys. "Come here, children. Let me look at you properly." The triplets approached, Michael helping steady her walker. She studied their faces, tears in her eyes. "You have her smile," she said softly. "Sarah's smile. She came to me, you know, when she first found the disposal records. She was so young, so determined to do what was right." "Mrs. Thompson," Hamilton warned, "these are confidential matters. The time for secrets is over, Alex." Another board member stood, a man with grey hair and kind eyes. "I'm done protecting you." More board members began rising, pulling out documents, phones, flash drives. 20 years of evidence, kept safe by people who'd worked with Sarah, who'd known James and Laura, who'd watched in silence as Hamilton's power grew. "Dad called them sleeper agents," Michael said suddenly. "People waiting for the right moment to act. Mom said they just needed proof," Marcus added. "And hope. And someone brave enough to stand first," Matthew finished. Margaret Thompson smiled. "Your parents were right. About everything." She turned to the board. "I move for an immediate vote of no confidence in Alexander Hamilton's leadership." "You can't," Hamilton sputtered. "Second," called another member. "Third." The votes came rapidly now, years of fear dissolving in a cascade of courage. Hamilton's face grew darker, with each raised hand. "This is a coup," he snarled. "I'll have all of you." "You'll what?" Betty stepped forward, her phone recording everything. "Silence them? Like you silenced Sarah? Like you silenced James and Laura?" "Or send them to Dr. Werner," Dan added. "State police just finished searching his facility, found some interesting patient records." Thomas watched his boys, standing tall beside Margaret Thompson, saw Sarah's determination shining in their faces. The old legal brief sat on the boardroom table. Proof of the day his wife had first discovered the truth, first decided to protect these children, no matter the cost. "I've already called my lawyers," Hamilton tried one last time. "These proceedings are illegal." "No, they're not," a new voice from the doorway. A tall woman in an impeccable suit strode in, flanked by federal agents. "I'm District Attorney Helen Martinez, and I have warrants for financial fraud, environmental violations, and conspiracy to commit murder." The room erupted. Board members, began sharing their evidence with the agents. Reporters outside pressed against the glass walls, cameras flashing. Hamilton looked around wildly, seeing 2 decades of power crumbling. He lunged suddenly toward the triplets, but Thomas was faster. The farmer's calloused hands caught Hamilton's expensive suit, holding him back. "That's enough," Thomas said quietly. "You've hurt enough people." Margaret Thompson's hand fell on Michael's shoulder. "Your mother, Sarah, she left something else with me for when her children were found." She pulled out 3 sealed envelopes. "She knew somehow that you'd need these one day." The boys took the letters with trembling hands. Thomas saw his wife's handwriting on the envelopes, her final gift to the sons she'd given up to protect. "She loved you so much," Margaret said softly. "She made us promise, all of us who knew, that we'd be ready when you came back. That we'd help you finish what she started." Outside, the storm broke. Rain drummed against the boardroom windows as federal agents led Alexander Hamilton away in handcuffs. But inside, surrounded by newfound allies and long-hidden truths, 3 boys held their mother's last words and knew they were finally, truly safe. Their father's company would be restored, their mother's sacrifice honored, and their birth mother's fight for justice would finally be won. Rain pounded against the boardroom windows as the boys opened their mother's letters with trembling hands. The federal agents had moved Hamilton to another room for questioning, but the energy of revelation still charged the air. Thomas sat beside, his newfound sons, Betty and Dan, flanking them protectively. Michael read first, his voice small but clear. "My dearest Michael, my brave firstborn. If you're reading this, you've already shown more courage than anyone should need to. I knew from the moment you were born, 3 minutes before your brothers, that you would be a protector. You get that from your father, Thomas, though. He doesn't know about you yet. Take care of your brothers, but remember to let others help carry the weight sometimes." Marcus's letter was next, his teddy bear tucked securely under one arm. "My sweet Marcus, my middle miracle. You were always the one who felt things most deeply, who saw the hurt in others and wanted to heal it. That's why you were given to Laura. She had that same gift. Keep that tender heart of yours, but protect it too. And know that every choice I made was to keep you safe." Matthew completed the trio, tears falling freely. "My precious Matthew, my youngest by 6 minutes. You have your father's quiet strength, his way of standing firm when the world storms around you. I see it in you even now, as I write this letter moments after signing the adoption papers. James will nurture that strength in you. Trust it. Trust yourself." The final paragraphs of each letter were identical. "There's so much you need to know. About the company, about Hamilton, about why I had to let you go. I've left proof with people I trust, Margaret Thompson, others who remember what Hamilton Industries used to be before Alex took control. They've waited years to help make things right. When I discovered the toxic dumping, I thought I could fight it openly. But then I learned I was pregnant with you 3, and Hamilton made it clear what happens to people who threaten his power. I knew I had to protect you. James and Laura Hamilton were different. They wanted to change things from the inside. They promised to keep you safe until the truth could come out. I chose Thomas's name for your birth certificates for a reason. He's the best man I've ever known, with the truest heart. I hope someday you'll understand why I couldn't tell him about you. Why I had to carry this secret even when the cancer came back. All my love, forever and always. Mom, Sarah Chen Mason." The silence that followed was broken only by the rain. Then Margaret Thompson spoke, her voice thick with emotion. "She left evidence too, proof of everything." She nodded to her assistant, who wheeled in a box of files. 20 years of Hamilton's crimes, environmental reports, safety violations, proof of what really happened to James and Laura. The federal agents began processing the documents as Margaret continued. "Sarah knew Hamilton would try to control the company through you 3. That's why she made sure you were adopted together, why she helped James set up the trust requiring unanimous consent. She knew someday you'd need that power to make things right. Betty was already scanning the files, her face hardening. These shipping manifests, they show toxic waste dumping in poor communities across 3 states. And here, bribes to local officials, threats to whistleblowers. And this, Dan held up a thick folder. Security footage from the night of James and Laura's accident. Maintenance records showing the brake lines were deliberately cut. Witness statements that disappeared from evidence. Thomas stared at Sarah's signature on the letters, remembering her quiet strength during those last days. How she'd made him promise to always help children in need. She was protecting everyone, he said softly. The communities Hamilton was poisoning. The workers he was silencing. And most of all, you. At 3, the boys huddled closer to him, their letters clutched tight. What happens now? Michael asked. Margaret smiled. Now we rebuild. Hamilton Industries was founded by James's grandfather to help communities, not destroy them. With the trust in your names and these good people to guide you, she gestured to Thomas, Betty, and Dan. We can restore that legacy, starting with cleanup of the contaminated sites, Betty added firmly, and full cooperation with the federal investigation. Dan nodded. Outside, the storm was beginning to clear. Sunlight broke through the clouds, casting long rays through the boardroom windows. Thomas looked at his sons, Sarah's final gift, her greatest act of protection, and saw the future brightening with the sky. Your mother, he told them, voice rough with emotion. Both your mothers. They'd be so proud of you. The boys smiled through their tears, a perfect mirror of Sarah's determination. They had found their true home, their real family, and their purpose. Hamilton's reign of secrets and fear was over. The truth had finally emerged into the light. The protest signs appeared outside Hamilton Industries by midday. Not angry mobs, but families from the affected communities, their handmade signs telling stories of illness, loss, and hope for change. The media crews turned their cameras from the corporate drama to the real faces of Hamilton's victims. Inside the boardroom, Michael studied a map dotted with red markers, each one a site of illegal dumping. Marcus sat beside him, his teddy bear watching over the proceedings, while Matthew took careful notes. We can start with the closest sites, Michael said, his finger tracing a path, the ones affecting local water supplies. Clean-up costs will be significant, a board member warned. We don't care about costs, Marcus replied firmly. We care about making things right. Dad always said a company's first duty is to its community, Matthew added, looking up from his notebook. Not its shareholders. Margaret Thompson beamed from her seat at the head of the table. Other board members nodded approvingly. Years of forced complicity giving way to relief at finally doing the right thing. Thomas watched from the doorway, pride warring with worry. His boys, 8 years old, and already shouldering such responsibility. Betty touched his arm, reading his thoughts. They're not alone, she reminded him. They have us. And look, she pointed to the growing crowd outside. Community leaders were organizing speakers, sharing stories of environmental impact and corporate negligence. But they were also sharing stories of hope, of communities coming together, of change finally coming. A small girl about the triplets. Age held up a sign. Thank you for being brave. The boys saw it through the window and straightened their shoulders. We should talk to them, Michael said suddenly. The people outside, they deserve to know what we're going to do. It's not usually done, a board member started to object. Then we'll do things differently, Marcus stated. Better, Matthew finished. Thomas stepped forward. You sure about this? The boys nodded, their faces showing Sarah's determination. Together, they walked through the building's lobby, past surprise security guards, and out into the afternoon sun. The crowd hushed as the triplets approached the impromptu podium. Michael spoke first, his clear voice carrying across the gathering. We're the new owners of Hamilton Industries. But more importantly, we're the sons of people who believed. in doing what's right. Our father, James Hamilton, died trying to stop the pollution, Marcus continued. Our mother, Laura, stood with him, and our birth mother, Sarah Chen Mason, protected us so we could finish what they started, Matthew added. The crowd listened intently as the boys laid out their plans. Immediate cleanup of contaminated sites, full compensation for affected families, complete transparency moving forward. No more secrets, no more cover-ups. We're just kids, Michael acknowledged, but we have help. He gestured to Thomas, Betty, Dan, and Margaret. People who never stopped fighting for the truth. We can't undo the past, Marcus said, but we can build a better future. Together, Matthew finished. The applause started slowly, then built to a thunderous wave. Community leaders stepped forward to shake their hands. Parents brought children forward to meet the young owners who were already changing their world. Thomas watched it all, seeing Sarah's legacy bloom in real time. The boys moved through the crowd with natural grace, listening to stories, accepting hugs, promising change with the simple honesty of children who hadn't yet learned to be cynical. Betty was already organizing teams to begin environmental assessments. Dan coordinated with federal agents to secure evidence. Margaret Thompson worked the phone, calling journalists, environmental experts, anyone who could help. As the sun began to set, the boys returned to Thomas's side, tired but proud. "Did we do okay?" Michael asked. Thomas knelt to their level. "Your mothers would be so proud. All of them. Can we go home now?" Marcus asked, clutching his bear. "To the farm? Our real home," Matthew added. Thomas hugged them close. Tomorrow would bring challenges. Lawyers, regulations, the massive task of rebuilding a company's soul. But tonight, they would go home to the farm, where it all began, where 3 scared boys had found their courage, where a family had been made whole. The protest signs stood planted in Hamilton Industries' pristine lawn, a forest of hope and accountability, each one a testament to the day 3 8-year-old boys took a stand, changing not just a company, but an entire community's future. The courtroom buzzed with tension as Hamilton's lawyers presented their final motion. Court documents lay stacked before the judge. Birth certificates, trust papers, psychiatric evaluations from Dr. Werner, environmental reports. A paper trail of truth and lies, love and betrayal. "Your Honor," Hamilton's lead attorney argued, "these children cannot possibly manage a multi-billion-dollar corporation. The trust must be invalidated for the company's own protection." The triplets sat, with Thomas in the front row, their Sunday clothes pressed and neat. Betty had trimmed their hair that morning, making them look even more identical than usual. Marcus's teddy bear wore a tiny tie. Their own lawyer, Margaret Thompson's daughter Rebecca, rose confidently. "Your Honor, my clients have already demonstrated more corporate responsibility in 1 week than their predecessor showed in 20 years. She held up a thick folder. "These are voluntary disclosure documents filed by the boys, revealing every environmental violation under the previous management. They've already initiated cleanup procedures and victim compensation programs, at ruinous expense to shareholders," Hamilton's lawyer countered. "The shareholders disagree," Rebecca smiled. She gestured to the courtroom's public seating where board members and major investors filled the rows. They've submitted statements supporting the boys' leadership. The judge, an older woman with shrewd eyes, studied the documents before her. "Dr. Werner's evaluations concern me," she admitted. "They should," Dan spoke up from his place beside the federal prosecutors, "given that Dr. Werner is currently facing charges for falsifying medical records and illegally medicating minors." The courtroom stirred. Hamilton, sitting with his lawyers, turned an alarming shade of red. "Furthermore," Rebecca continued, "my clients have appointed a professional management team, approved by the board, to handle day-to-day operations. They retain final approval on major decisions, exactly as their father intended when he created the trust. A trust created under suspicious circumstances," Hamilton's lawyer tried again. You mean circumstances like these? Rebecca held up another document. This is James Hamilton's final letter to his lawyer, dated the day before his death. In it, he expresses fear for his life and details the environmental crimes he'd discovered. He created the trust to ensure the company would eventually return to its original mission of responsible corporate citizenship. The judge read the letter carefully, then looked at the triplets. Young men, do you understand the responsibility you're taking on? Michael stood, his brothers following in perfect synchronization. Yes, Your Honor. Our fathers, both of them, taught us that power means responsibility. Our mothers, all of them, showed us that doing right matters. More than money, Marcus added. And we have help, Matthew finished, glancing at Thomas. People who care about more than profit. The judge's face softened, almost imperceptibly. Ms. Thompson, what guarantees can you offer about the company's stability during this transition? Rebecca presented a final document. The boys have established an oversight committee combining environmental experts, community representatives, and experienced business leaders. Every decision will be reviewed for both corporate responsibility and financial stability. And the shareholders approve this arrangement? Margaret Thompson stood from her place among the board members. We do, Your Honor, unanimously. These boys represent our best chance to restore Hamilton Industries' reputation and purpose. The judge considered for a long moment, reviewing the papers before her. The courtroom held its breath. Motion denied, she announced finally. The trust stands. However, she looked directly at the triplets. I'm appointing an independent monitor to review all major decisions until you reach majority age, for your own protection. We accept, Your Honor, the boys said in unison. Hamilton stood abruptly. This is absurd. They're children. Children who've shown more wisdom than you, the judge replied sharply. Children who understand that a company's worth isn't just measured in dollars. She gavelled the session closed before Hamilton could respond. Outside the courthouse, reporters gathered as Rebecca addressed the media. Thomas stood back with the boys, watching their story spread across live feeds and social media. Did we win? Marcus asked quietly, hugging his bear. You did more than win. Thomas knelt beside them. You showed everyone that doing the right thing matters more than being powerful. Betty appeared with celebratory ice cream cones. Your mother Sarah used to say that justice moves slow as molasses but spreads just as sweet. The boys smiled, Sarah's determination shining in their eyes. They had faced down corporate lawyers, hostile takeover attempts, and their grandfather's final grasp at power. They had won the right to rebuild their father's company according to their mother's principles, but most importantly, they had shown that even children could change the world when they stood together for what was right. 1 month after the court victory, adoption papers lay on Thomas's kitchen table, waiting for final signatures. The morning sun streamed through windows freshly washed by 3 eager pairs of hands. The farm had come alive with the sound of children's laughter, the once quiet rooms now bursting with energy. You sure about this? Thomas asked the boys, though he already knew the answer. The company could find you fancy guardians, people who know about business and society. We want you, Michael said firmly. Only you, Marcus added, his teddy bear sporting a new bow tie for the occasion. Forever, Matthew finished. Betty wiped tears from her eyes as she witnessed the signatures. The adoption papers made official what their hearts had known since that first morning by the fence. They were family. Back at Hamilton Industries, changes were already visible. The sterile lobby now featured a wall of community photos showing clean-up efforts in progress. Children played in newly restored parks where toxic waste had once lurked. Families smiled. From beside cleaned rivers, the boys had insisted on keeping their father's old office, but with changes. James Hamilton's desk now held 3 smaller workstations, where they would review reports and make decisions together. Laura's environmental awards hung on one wall, while Sarah's original research into the company's violations occupied a place of honor. "The first cleanup site is completely restored," Margaret reported during their weekly meeting. "Local tests show no trace of contamination." Michael studied the before and after photos carefully. "Start on the next one tomorrow." "The community garden project?" Marcus asked. "And the health clinic," Matthew confirmed. Their oversight committee, a mix of environmental experts, business leaders and community representatives, nodded approvingly. The boys might be young, but their instincts for healing both land and relationships proved sound. After the meeting, Thomas drove them home in his truck, now sporting a fresh coat of paint, courtesy of the grateful maintenance staff. The boys chattered about their plans: solar panels for low-income housing, scholarships for environmental science students, a foundation in their mothers' names to support corporate whistleblowers. At the farm, the changes were smaller but no less meaningful. The struggling cornfield had been partially converted to a test site for sustainable farming practices. Local farmers came to learn new techniques, sharing knowledge over coffee at the kitchen table. "Dad!" Michael called from the porch, the words still new and wonderful to both father and sons. "Can we check the seedlings?" Thomas followed them to Sarah's old greenhouse, recently restored. Inside, rows of native plants grew strong and green, destined for areas damaged by industrial waste. The boys had memorized each species' name and purpose, combining their father's business sense with their mother's love of healing broken things. "Your mom Sarah used to spend hours in here," Thomas told them, touching a delicate leaf. "Said growing things was her way of fighting back against folks who only knew how to destroy." "Like Mom Laura's recycling programs?" Marcus nodded. "And Mom's evidence gathering," Matthew added, referring to Sarah's undercover work. The adoption papers were more than just legal documents. They were a bridge between past and future, connecting three remarkable women who had loved these boys enough to protect them at any cost. Now those same boys were transforming their father's company into a force for good, guided by their mother's principles and their new father's steady wisdom. That evening, as fireflies danced over the fields, the family sat on the porch sharing ice cream and dreams. Betty dropped by with fresh cookies and updates on the latest community projects. Dan called with news of more evidence against Hamilton, ensuring he would face justice for his crimes. "Sometimes," Thomas said quietly, watching his boys launch, "an impromptu ice cream sundae competition. The best kind of growing happens after the hardest storms." The boys paused their celebration, understanding in their eyes. They had lost so much: 3 parents who had loved them, years of security, the simple joy of being children without burdens. But they had gained something too: truth, purpose, and a family bound together by choice and love, rather than just blood. The adoption papers sat inside, waiting to be filed tomorrow, but the real family had been formed weeks ago, in moments of courage and trust, in shared laughter and tears, in the simple choice to stand together against injustice. The newly expanded family tree hung in the farmhouse kitchen, its branches telling a story of love that transcended blood. Sarah Chen Mason's name connected to Thomas, then branched to the triplets. James and Laura Hamilton occupied another branch, their influence honored. Even Betty had her own spot, labeled honorary grandmother. "It's getting bigger," Michael observed one morning, adding a new name, Amy Chen, Sarah's recently discovered sister, who'd reached out after seeing the boys. "On the news." "Family has a way of doing that," Thomas replied, flipping pancakes on Sarah's old griddle. The kitchen had become command central for their expanding world, where corporate decisions shared space with homework and chores. A sleek company car pulled up outside, bringing Margaret Thompson for their weekly breakfast meeting. These gatherings had become a tradition, bridging the gap between farmhouse wisdom and corporate strategy. "The Hamilton Industries Foundation approved all your proposals," Margaret announced, accepting a plate of pancakes. "The Environmental Education Center, the renewable energy grants, everything." Marcus looked up from feeding scraps to the chickens through the kitchen window. "Even the scholarship program?" Especially that, Margaret smiled. The Sarah Chen Mason Scholarship for Environmental Science already has 50 applicants. The boys shared proud grins. They were learning to navigate both worlds, reviewing corporate reports in the morning, helping with farm chores in the afternoon. Their father's business acumen and their mother's dedication to justice shaped every decision. "There's something else," Margaret added, pulling out a folder. "We found more of Sarah's research. She wasn't just tracking environmental violations. She was developing solutions." The folder contained detailed plans for sustainable industrial practices written in Sarah's careful hand. Ideas decades ahead of their time, waiting for the right moment and the right people to implement them. "Mom knew," Matthew said softly. "She knew someday we'd need these." Thomas touched the papers gently. "She always played the long game. Like that greenhouse full of native plants she started, knowing someday they'd help heal the land." The family tree watched over them as they planned, its branches a reminder of how past and present intertwined. Outside, more cars were arriving, community leaders coming for the regular town hall meeting the boys had instituted. The farmhouse kitchen had become an unlikely boardroom, where corporate executives sat beside farmers, where environmental scientists shared coffee with local teachers. The boys moved easily between groups, their natural ability to bridge divides growing stronger each day. "The cleanup at Miller's Creek is finished," announced the head of environmental restoration. "Fish are returning to the river. The community garden project is ready to expand," added a local organizer. "We're teaching kids about sustainable farming." Betty arrived with fresh muffins and sharp observations about which neighborhoods needed the most help. Dan called in updates about the ongoing investigation into Hamilton's crimes, each piece of evidence strengthening their position. The boys had insisted that Hamilton Industries' new headquarters include a working farm on its grounds, complete with a replica of Sarah's greenhouse. Corporate employees now spent time learning about the land they had once helped destroy, finding healing in growing things. "You've built something remarkable," Margaret told them during a quiet moment. "Not just a better company, but a better way of doing business." "We had good teachers," Michael replied, watching Thomas show a group of executives how to check soil quality. "And better examples," Marcus added, thinking of their 3 mothers. "And each other," Matthew finished, as always. The family tree's branches seemed to wave in the morning breeze from the open window. A new name was already waiting to be added, Dr. Lisa Chen, another of Sarah's relatives, who'd offered to help expand their environmental health programs. Thomas watched his boys moving confidently between their worlds, equally at home, in corporate boardrooms and farm fields, never forgetting either heritage. They were building bridges not just between communities, but between ways of seeing the world. The kitchen door opened again, bringing more visitors, more ideas, more connections. The boys had transformed Hamilton Industries from a source of destruction into a force for healing. But their greatest achievement was here, in this farmhouse kitchen, where barriers between wealth and work, between corporate and community, dissolved over shared meals and common purpose. The first harvest photo captured a moment of pure joy. 3 boys and their father standing in a field of golden corn, their faces dusty and beaming. Behind them, the restored farmland stretched to the horizon, a testament to what care and attention could accomplish in just one growing season. "Best crop in 20 years, Thomas declared, studying the photo Betty had just pinned to the fridge. The kitchen walls were now covered with similar moments. The boys' first tractor lesson, community planting day, the groundbreaking for Hamilton Industries' new sustainable agriculture division. The soil testing program worked, Michael said, proudly. He'd spent months helping environmental scientists develop better farming practices, combining traditional wisdom with modern technology. "And the new irrigation system," Marcus added, his teddy bear sporting overalls these days. "Plus good timing," Matthew finished, checking their carefully maintained weather logs. The harvest had become more than just a farm event. Local families arrived throughout the morning, many from communities still recovering from Hamilton's environmental damage. The boys had turned the farm into a teaching center, sharing their father's agricultural knowledge alongside their corporate reforms. "Remember how empty this place felt?" Betty asked Thomas quietly, watching the boys demonstrate proper corn husking techniques to a group of city kids. "Now look at it." The farm buzzed with activity. Margaret Thompson and her environmental team collected soil samples, documenting the land's recovery. Dan helped direct parking for the stream of visitors. Even Amy and Lisa Chen had flown in, eager to see their newfound nephew's first harvest. "Sarah would love this," Thomas said, his voice rough with emotion. All three of them would. But the boys had insisted on honoring their mother's legacies in tangible ways. The Sarah Chen Mason Environmental Research Center occupied one renovated barn. The Laura Hamilton Community Education Program ran workshops on sustainable living, and the James and Laura Hamilton Memorial Scholarship sent promising students to study environmental science. Near noon, a corporate helicopter landed in the designated field, now a regular occurrence that no longer sent the boys running for cover. Rebecca Thompson emerged with the latest quarterly reports, but quickly traded her business suit for work clothes. "The new environmental initiatives are paying off," she reported, helping to load corn onto a truck bound for the local food bank. "Profits are actually up since we stopped cutting corners. Because we're investing in the future," Michael explained to a visiting business student, "not just the next quarter." "And in people," Marcus added, organizing volunteers for the afternoon shift. "And in doing what's right," Matthew concluded, checking their donation tallies. The boys moved easily between roles, young executives reviewing reports, farmers teaching cultivation techniques, sons helping their father coordinate the harvest. They had found their balance, carrying 3 families' worth of lessons into everything they did. Thomas watched them work, remembering that first morning when 3 scared children huddled by his fence. Now they stood tall and confident, their father's business sense tempered by their mother's compassion. His own love of the land merged with their drive to heal what was broken. The harvest photo would join others on the kitchen wall, marking another milestone in their journey. But the real harvest wasn't just in the crops they'd grown or the changes they'd made. It was in the way they'd learned to combine their different worlds, to take the best of each heritage and grow something new. As the sun began to set, the boys gathered their extended family, Thomas, Betty, Dan, Margaret, the Chen sisters, and countless others who'd become part of their story, for a celebration dinner at the long kitchen table. "To the harvest," Michael proposed, raising his glass of apple cider. "To family," Marcus added, his teddy bear propped in its own chair. "To home," Matthew finished, looking around at the faces that had become essential to their world. Thomas studied his sons in the golden evening light. They carried Sarah's determination in their eyes, James and Laura's vision in their hearts, and now his own love of the land in their hands. The harvest had yielded more than crops. It had given them all a second chance at family, at purpose, at healing what was broken. Outside, the cleaned fields stretched away under the harvest moon, ready for next season's planting. Inside, the kitchen rang with laughter and plans for the future, the family tree watching over them all from its place of honor on the wall. The new fence post stood straight and tall in the morning light, its wood weathered to a silvery gray. 3 sets of height marks carved into its surface told a story of growth, not just in inches, but in courage, love, and purpose. 1 year, to the day since 3 scared boys had huddled by the old fence, changing everyone's lives forever. "Look how much you've grown," Thomas said, measuring Michael against his last mark. All 3 boys had shot up over the year, flourishing like well-tended plants in rich soil. "Almost as tall as Mom Laura was," Marcus observed, his trusty teddy bear now sporting a tiny Hamilton Industries sustainability pin. "But not quite as tall as Mom Sarah," Matthew added, touching her name carved beside the highest mark. The morning sun cast long shadows across the farm, no longer struggling, but thriving under their combined care. The cornfield had become a model of sustainable agriculture, drawing visitors from around the world. Hamilton Industries executives regularly traded their suits for overalls, learning about the land their company had once poisoned. Betty arrived with her traditional Saturday morning muffins, now famous among the corporate board members who attended their weekly kitchen meetings. "The last of Hamilton's conspirators pleaded guilty this morning," she announced. "Dan just called with the news." The boys absorbed this quietly. Their grandfather would spend years in prison, along with Dr. Werner and others who had helped cover up decades of crimes. But the triplets had insisted on something more meaningful than punishment: rehabilitation programs for white-collar criminals, focused on environmental awareness and corporate responsibility. "The trust fund hearing is next week," Thomas reminded them. "You sure about your decision?" The boys nodded in unison. They had chosen to redirect their inherited wealth into environmental restoration and community development, keeping only enough to secure the farm's future and fund their education. "Money's just paper," Michael said, echoing words James Hamilton had written in his final letter. "Change is what matters," Marcus added, remembering Laura's passionate speeches about corporate responsibility and family. Matthew finished, touching the fence post where 3 mothers' names were carved beside their height marks. The morning breeze carried the sound of approaching vehicles, their extended family arriving for the 1-year celebration. Margaret Thompson's car pulled up alongside Amy and Lisa Chen's rental. Dan's police cruiser parked next to Rebecca's hybrid. The farmhouse kitchen would soon overflow with people who had become essential parts of their story. Thomas watched, his boys greeting their guests, marveling at how naturally they moved between worlds. They were equally comfortable in corporate boardrooms and chicken coops, equally skilled at analyzing environmental reports and judging the ripeness of corn. The fence post had become more than just a marker of height. It was a testament to how far they'd all come. Its carved names and dates told a story of 3 mothers who had loved fiercely enough to sacrifice everything, of a father who had found his sons in the most unexpected way, of a family formed not by blood, but by choice and courage. "Sometimes," Thomas said to Betty, as they watched the boys giving tours of their latest sustainable farming projects, "I think Sarah knew all along, knew they'd find their way here somehow. She always said love was like water." Betty smiled. "It finds its way home no matter what barriers try to stop it." The celebration continued through the day, the farmhouse kitchen becoming once again the heart of their expanded world. Corporate executives and local farmers shared Sarah's recipes. Environmental scientists and community organizers planned future projects, and 3 boys who had once been afraid to trust anyone now moved confidently through the crowds, secure in their place and purpose. As evening fell, Thomas found his sons by the fence post, tracing the height marks with gentle fingers. "Ready for another year?" he asked softly. They turned to him with Sarah's determination in their eyes, James's vision in their hearts, and Laura's compassion in their souls. "Ready," they said together, these brothers who had found their way home, these sons who had healed not just a company but a community, these boys who had reminded everyone that the greatest wealth wasn't measured in dollars but in love, courage, and the simple truth of doing what was right. The fence post stood sentinel in the gathering dusk, its carved marks a promise of more growth to come, more stories to tell, more healing to accomplish. The circle was complete, but the story was really just beginning.